Welcome back. I'm Dr. Shirley Garrett, and today we're reading Chapter 5 of Hot Flash Divas. The title of the chapter is The Trio. The next day, Todd jumped into overdrive and handled all of the funeral arrangements. This surprised me since he never bothered to drive my father to the doctor's appointment or even visit him when he was sick. Despite all his years as a funeral director, he didn't know how to deal with his grieving wife. He offered no emotional or physical comfort unless I sought it. As a Catholic, Dad had requested a visitation rosary and a funeral mass. Kevin used the ticket I bought for him and flew in from Chicago for the trio of events. That night, standing between Todd and Kevin, I greeted everyone who came through the receiving line during visitation. Joyce was aflutter, not quite sure what to do to help. She settled next to Todd, greeting folks and handing me an unending supply of tissues when needed. All 5 of Dad's care sitters came to pay their respects. Each one hugged me and shared her favorite Mr. O'Hare story. Evelyn held my hand. Remember when Imogene came to your daddy's room and told him she'd cook him anything he wanted if he'd eat it for her? I chuckled. Built like a refrigerator, Imogene presented a tough persona, but was more like memory foam inside. I sure do. He ordered crisp bacon. He loved bacon and coffee. Evelyn grinned. He sure did. I'll never forget it. Imogene planted her fist on her hips and said, "Well, heck, that's not on your diet, but I'll cook you an entire pig if you'll eat it." My eyes misted as I laughed. He ate every bite and asked for 2 more slices. She released my hand, turned, and introduced her staff to Todd. I'm Evelyn, the owner of Sitters for Comfort. This is my staff, Janie, Rosie, Debbie, and Sarah. Todd, I saw you the day Bill died, but you were so busy rushing off, we didn't have an opportunity to be introduced. Todd's face flushed. He mumbled something and offered his hand. Evelyn turned to my brother. "Are you Kevin, Bill's son?" she asked. Kevin shuffled his feet. Yes, ma'am. Your daddy talked about how much he loved you. He was doing his level best to hold on until you could come to say goodbye. It's a shame you didn't make it here in time. Now it was Kevin's turn to blush. Evelyn's staff offered glares with their condolences as they shook hands with Todd and Kevin. I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. Evelyn smiled at Joyce. "Miss Joyce, it's so good to see you again. Bill looked forward to every one of your visits. I know you'll take excellent care of Phoenix." Joy hugged Evelyn. "I gave him my word that I would." Gina, Letitia, and Kat were next in line, offering hugs and support. Todd shifted from one foot to another and had trouble meeting their eyes when he greeted them. I never did find out what transpired between him and the Divas 2 nights earlier during my drug-induced sleep. Father Cuata walked to the lectern in the chapel and asked everyone to be seated so that the rosary could begin. I felt uncomfortable calling Marco Father, since we graduated high school together. He's Gina's cousin, and I'd had a crush on him during my sophomore year. It's strange how things turn out. The rosary droned on and on with the repeated recitation of Our Fathers and Hail Marys, punctuated at regular intervals with Glory Bees. After what seemed like a millennium, it was time to go home, to rest, and prepare for the funeral the next day. Todd and Kevin stood to one side as the Divas surrounded me for a final group hug. Todd and I drove separate cars since he arrived early to arrange everything to his specifications. He stayed behind to handle any lingering details. Joyce walked me to my car with Kevin trailing behind. "You call me if you need me," she said and squeezed my arm. Take care, Kevin. I'll see y'all tomorrow for round 2. Kevin looked straight ahead as we traveled the 10-minute trip home. His voice broke as he said, "You're lucky to have such good friends." I shot a glance at him. Yes, I am. They've been lifesavers. I'm sorry I didn't come sooner. I didn't think I could take seeing another person die after B. He sniffled and wiped at his eyes with his fingers. I pulled into a lighted church parking lot and handed him a tissue. Killing the engine, I unbuckled my seatbelt and shifted in my seat to face him in the dimly lit car. Beatrice had died 2 years earlier of multi-organ failure after her colon ruptured. It was apparent to me, as a mental health professional, that Kevin hadn't dealt with his grief over his late wife's death. His habit of avoiding emotional pain hurt him because now he had double the grief, one piled on top of the other. Dad thought you didn't come because you hadn't forgiven him for his and Mom's initial rejection of B when you first married. He wanted to say goodbye to you. He loved you until the end. Kevin shook his head. Hell, I got over that years ago. He raised his brows as if surprised. Is that really what he thought? Yes, he told me that day before he died, when I called and asked you to come. The day you said you had a cold. My words were harsher than I intended, but the boiling anger in my stomach leaked out through my tone. Dropping his head into his hands, he sobbed. I slumped, exhausted, as I patted his shoulder and handed him more tissues. When Kevin recovered, he honked and swiped at his leaking eyes. Feel better? Yeah. Wish I could have done that when B died. I was trying so hard to hold it together for the girls. They were barely in their teens, and Susie was such a drama queen. I nodded. She still is. He shook his head as if to clear it. Melinda was so quiet and self-contained. She just shut down and stayed in her room. Just like her father. By the time I could cry, it was like I couldn't do it. I told him, I call that emotional constipation. He barked a laugh and honked again into the tissues. It's just the two of us now, Kevin. We need each other. I reached over and started the engine. I know I shouldn't ask this. I don't have the right, he stammered. But do you think you can forgive me? I mean, for leaving you with all of Dad's care. I stared out the windshield for a moment. I'm working on it, okay? Give me some time. It wasn't just about me, you know. Dad needed you, and you weren't there for him. I thought about all the things Dad did during the years to take care of us. Kevin just chickened out and deserted him. I took a deep breath and shoved the gear shift into drive. What's more important, Kevin, is can you forgive yourself? Scene break. The next morning I stood sandwiched between Todd on my right and Kevin on my left in the front pew at the Annunciation of the Lord Catholic Church. Joy stood beside Kevin. From time to time she glanced over at me with a worried look as if I might faint or go berserk. The flag-draped coffin occupied most of the center aisle, making the entrance into the front pews near impossible. Candles glowed on the altar, casting flickering light on the image of the crucified Christ hanging on the apse wall. Statues of Mary and Joseph looked at the congregation with serene smiles from niches on each side of the chancel. The stained glass windows cast pools of colored light across the pews. As a recovering Catholic, I found the scene familiar and comforting. I responded by rote in all the right places during the funeral mass. Mid-sermon, I felt the pew begin to vibrate. Todd's left leg was bouncing, so I patted his knee to still it. He smiled in apology and put his arm around me. I leaned against him, grateful for the gesture. I peeked at Kevin, concerned about how he was handling his guilt. The majority of the mourners the last 2 days had bombarded him with their disapproval through actions and snide comments like, Phoenix, you were such a comfort to your dad during his illness. At least You were there when he needed you. Kevin was sitting stoic with his jaw clenched. Father Culotta called me to the ambo to give the eulogy. My heart pounded in my ears. My legs felt like cooked linguine. Clutching my notes, I gave my complete concentration to walking up the stairs. I flattened the paper over the open Bible and grasped the sides for support as I looked at the silent crowd. As many of you know, Bill O'Hare was a decorated veteran. He piloted a C-69 Constellation during the Korean War. When he returned home, he met my mother and began his family. There were things about Dad that many of you know firsthand. He was a man of honor, and his word was titanium. I paused to cinch in my emotions. Joyce leaned forward in the pew listening, but Todd sat back with his arms crossed. Kevin pulled his handkerchief from his pocket to wipe his eyes. A man's actions speak volumes. My dad believed in returning things in better shape than when he borrowed them. When I was a kid, he once borrowed my grandmother's Oldsmobile while our Chevy was in the shop. When he picked up her car, the gas tank was half full. When he returned it days later, that car had a full tank and was freshly washed. I took a deep breath, trying not to cry. My eyes strayed to the divas in the third row. Letitia and Gina were mopping their eyes with tissues. Kat sat rigid, struggling to control the tears welling her eyes. My dad was a second father to each of them. Kat nodded for me to continue. My father was there for his family, for the small things as well as the large ones, the easy and the hard. When that special embarrassing time came for me as a girl, he asked me every month if I needed quarters for the machine. My voice cracked. Daddy loved NASCAR and was a die-hard Alabama football fan. Bless his heart, he was a redneck from the top of his funny ball caps down to his white socks. That didn't matter to anyone in any walk of life because he was a quality person. People were smiling and nodding their heads. The things most of us will remember about Bill O'Hare was his sense of humor and his practical jokes. I'm sure many of you shared a laugh with him over some of his jokes. How many of you tried to pick up the quarter he glued down on the sidewalk outside of the Piggly Wiggly? Chuckles filled the church. Many people nodded or with sheepish expressions raised their hands. Daddy loved to plant a little laughter in people's lives and then watch it grow and spread to others. This is the way I'm sure he would want you to remember him. Continue to spread the joy. Letitia boomed, "Amen!" I returned to my seat and pulled my dress over my knees. Kevin reached over, took my hand, and squeezed it. After the Mass, Father Culotta led the procession from the church. I'm sorry for your loss, Phoenix. Again, I regret that I won't be able to perform the funeral service in Huntsville. That's no problem. Dad would be pleased that Father O'Brien is officiating. Did you know he was the pastor at Dad's church when he lived in Huntsville? Yes, Father O'Brien told me that when we discussed the arrangements. Thank you for everything, Father. I felt my cheeks burn. He smiled. You're most welcome. I'd like to see you in church on Sunday morning. I stepped back a few paces. Thanks for the invitation. Perhaps I'll see you at the reunion next year. I'll be there. Todd drove the funeral home's Cadillac town car. Joyce and Kevin piled in the back seat while I rode shotgun. The funeral directors loaded Dad into the hearse for his final ride. The police officers hired to provide an escort took the positions, and the slow motorcade crept along the streets of Decatur at 25 miles per hour. All the cars turned on their lights to signal their inclusion in the funeral procession. In true Southern tradition, all the traffic in both lanes stopped and pulled over out of respect for the deceased. When we hit Interstate 565, the police escort dropped away. The 40-minute drive to Maple Hill Cemetery in Huntsville was quiet. We were all deep in our own thoughts. I gazed at the 363 363-foot-tall Saturn V moon rocket as we drove by the U.S. Space and Rocket Center. They were installing the lights that would turn it into a giant Christmas tree in a few weeks. The idea of Christmas without Dad brought tears to my eyes. I swiped at them with one of the tissues I tucked away in my purse. When I stepped out of the car at Maple Hill, I spotted only one cloud in the cerulean sky. The recent cold snap had turned the maple trees into a blaze of reds and oranges. The cemetery, founded in 1882, was dotted with a bounty of old gravestones and mausoleums. A dark green funeral tent marked the spot of my dad's final resting place. A rug of green plastic grass covered the red Alabama clay. Metal folding chairs offered 2 rows of seating. Kevin took my arm as we walked together to the spot. I was grateful for his support. I sat on the front row, Kevin to my left, Todd and Joyce to my right. The divas sat in the chairs behind me. I felt a twinge of pain in my chest and tried not to hyperventilate. As the tears began to trickle, I dug in my purse for a tissue, but Kat reached over my shoulder and handed me 2, and Joyce reached across with another. Father O'Brien opened his Bible and with an Irish brogue said, "Dear God." Upon this pronouncement, the sky opened and poured a deluge of rain. I looked around and saw everyone pressing closer together with hunched shoulders. The pounding downpour drowned out his shouted eulogy. A mist traveled on a tender breeze that kissed my face. "Amen," Father O'Brien bellowed, closing his Bible with a snap. The rain stopped as though someone had turned off the spigot. Wiping her eyes, Letitia said, "Even the sky cried for your daddy." Thank you for listening. If you would like, hit the like button or subscribe. And tomorrow we'll be looking at chapter 6. Have a great day. Be safe. Be healthy. Bye.